The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, residents of Easton. This is Bill Ames, the co-host of Film Connection. Film Connection is in its 21st year, we're proud to say. You will meet my co-host in a second, Priscilla Almquist Olsen. We feature local artists, local filmmakers, people who used to live in the area, going on to great things, which we'll be talking about today, certainly, because there are numerous of them. So it's nice to stay connected to this world, and I think through our show, you'll feel connected to the media results in the town of Easton. We also have a Hockomock Film Festival, which will be, the deadline for entries is, I think, May 15th, and a film club. So Easton is fast becoming the Hollywood of Bristol County, and that's the thing to put in your head. We're trying to create a new model here. Now, that said, my pleasure today to welcome our guest, my great friend Ed McDonough, who was one of the early founders, I guess you could call him, of the Hockomock Film Festival, which has gone on to success, which we'll be talking about. So I'd like to turn it over to my co-host, Priscilla Almquist Olsen, to ask Ed the first question.
Okay. Well, welcome, Ed. I've heard so many wonderful things about you. I've met you before. And the most outstanding thing about you, as far as ECAT is concerned and our film festival, is that you always send us wonderful films that, as the media director at Canton High School, you solicit the students and they produce, and many times they're winners. So tell us a little bit, Ed, about your childhood, where you were raised, and were there any influences in your childhood which paved the way for you to be on the path that you're on today?
Okay. Well, son of immigrants, both me mom and me dad came from County Galway, Ireland, in a town called Cullen, and there's an oral tradition of storytelling. And I definitely learned it at the kitchen table, from my aunts and uncles. Storytelling was paramount, and in any good media production, it boils down to story first. So I really have to give them credit. We didn't have a lot of money, and I remember in third grade, daydreaming out the window, seeing the sixth graders with the cool teacher with the Super 8 camera making a film, saying, I would love to do that, but we could never afford that. And years later, I taught in a small school in North Cambridge, Mass. And a guy came in and said, hey, how would you like to bring your kids rowing? I'll do that for a day. It'd be a good outing for him. And it was at the Navy Yard in Boston, right by Old Ironsides. And when we got in the boat, he handed me this camera. And it was one of the early video cameras that were, he had a waterproof housing for it, but it was a cassette-driven camera. It wasn't the big VHS, it was the smaller ones. And my previous experience was filming a challenge project I gave some kids, which was you had to make a marble move for a minute and set off a mousetrap. And a kid came in with this incredible thing. They had to pull the back seat out of the car to fit it in to get it into school. And a friend of mine had a camera, but it was the old style tube cameras where you needed 3 people to operate it. You had to have a cameraman, had a sound person with a separate deck, and then someone holding the video deck. And that was pretty monstrosity. It was monstrosity. So to have a single camera that I could shoot with, that was kind of cool. And I had very little experience in it. But he wanted to get some film of this boating program because he was putting together a grant. And I noticed it had this thing called a flying eraser head, meaning you could edit as you shot. So I love film, I love filmmaking, but I never did anything with it. And I edited film in the camera. And when he saw it, he got the grant, and it ended up that I worked for him that summer. And we had a partnership with the Department of Youth Services. The kids that were coming on work release before they went home would come to us and they'd build boats, and they'd work with kids who, from various Boston neighborhoods. Sometimes there were kids, the program was called Same Boat, all in the same boat. And the idea was everybody's in it together. And they built boats and they coached kids learning how to row. So if you have a bunch of kids from a neighborhood that never rowed before, they look at these kids who really had a lot of tough cards dealt to them over time. Suddenly, they were looked upon as a valuable resource and endeared. And I'm a little drifting away from our film topic, but to bring it home, we made videos about those activities, and particularly the boat building and the launching of the boat and whatnot. And it was like the birth of a child for these guys. It was a real feeling of accomplishment. And I learned through it the power of video, how it can be a great advocacy tool to promote any endeavor, and how a community can be built and how everybody has a part to play. So it was like the early seeds. Fast forward, I wanted to learn more about video, so I went to Norwood Community Television, much like ECAT, and they had a video, a really nice SVHS editing system, and it was one of the first nonlinear ones. You probably heard of it, Video Toaster. And when Apple first came about, they put a sticker on the Amiga computer that had it and called it Video Link, and that was their first setup for nonlinear. And I learned how to edit the old school with in and out points. But I knew as much as the teacher teaching me, and because I bought an Amiga at that point and I was kind of figuring it out, but I didn't know much. But she didn't either, because it was a brand new field. Nonlinear editing was something that was kind of the dawn of a great thing in the 80s. So when she left, she recommended me to teach the class that I was just a student in, and I was literally learning on the job. I had a student teacher who applied for a job in Canton and got it. And he found out that one of his courses he had to teach was video and knew nothing about it. So I gave him a one-weekend workshop. And this is a true story. He ended up going to California, and he was in the something, Death Cab for Cutie. It was a band. He was in their music video and left to go to California. And suddenly the guy who was being trained to replace retired, and they were desperate for a teacher. At the same time, the school I was teaching at looked like it was going to close. So I applied for the position and got it with very little background in actually teaching video, but no one had it back then. And I learned on the job. I went back and got a second degree in communications from Fitchburg, but it was by making videos that I learned how to be a better storyteller and a better teacher. Remember reading an article in, I think, the Patriot Ledger about this group in Easton had it wasn't called the Hockomock at first, it was the Easton Film
Festival.
I thought, this is amazing. Why can't we do that too? Wow. And then eventually you did open it up and we were able to play, and it was such an empowering program for our students, because kids like John Curtizo has since gone on to work in the New York market, and he has his own production company there, but it's worked for as camera assistant on The Good Wife, Nurse, one with the pill in the logo, I can't think of the name, but a variety of shows that everybody's heard. His client list includes Oprah Winfrey and Condé Nast, and he got his start at the Hockomock Film Festival. And that was his first validation that what he was doing was much wider than just him and his friends fooling around, but something that's worth watching. So John was one of our early alums, along with kids like Jack McNamara, who works for ESPN. He has a 30 for 30 Emmy. Haley Russman, who has worked in a variety of positions at Condé Nast, but the list goes on. And we've really tried to network our alums so they support one another and reach back and help the next generation coming forward. So
Great.
I had no formal training in video. I kind of just landed in the field. My first editing was crash editing from one VCR to another. And
So tell me, you've talked a little bit about some of your challenges. What was the biggest challenge that you can recall and made the biggest impact on you?
Lots of challenges along the way. I like to talk about filmmaking being problem solving. We are solving problems, and there's always problems, from format changes, from big beta tapes to VHS tapes to SVHS tapes to mini DVs, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's our phones in our pockets, our mobile TV studios. So I don't know if I had to pick one challenge off the top of my head. I'd say during COVID, when we have kids at home, we're video people, but we're looking at a screen. How do you communicate? How do you get people to have things done? And what do you use for equipment? Well, that's when I totally embraced the cell phone. I had some kids that made some great videos with them, but they were limiting, particularly the earlier versions of some of the software in it. You couldn't get to the precise edit point, but you could tell stories with it. And we learned in COVID to really embrace the cell phone, and now most of our kids, that's what they shoot on, with a microphone added to get good sound. And you can get, the iPhones now are better than the cameras I had 5-10 years ago. So I'd say that's one of my challenges.
Wow.
Well,
Adapting.
Yep.
You mentioned the iPhones and whatever. This weekend I read this book called, it was all about the evolution of Friendster, MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. Ended up with TikTok. And TikTok is all about producing videos, as you probably know. And they have these collaboratives. So the world that you grew up in your career-wise is exploding. We all know this, but it was fascinating to read this thing as to where it goes, because you have things like AI coming in now, which are directly relevant to. Are you familiar at all with some of the broad concepts behind AI and editing and?
So many directions, and then the whole idea of 360 video, and how that's a whole different way of storytelling.
Tell us about that.
So where would you like me to start?
Well,
you want to go social media first, or
let's try social media. Let's walk it down
okay.
Because as I read in this book, it was a real journey to this, having kids or people who were adults but weren't particularly mature, uploading videos that were inappropriate, and all the near disasters that YouTube, for all its mighty power, was one disaster after another for years in terms of.
Well, let's attack that first. What I like to teach our kids is their personal brand, and every post they make, every click they take, someone's watching them. And if you would be embarrassed to sit next to your folks with something, or a college admissions officer or an employer, the web lasts forever. So you really need to be careful and curate what you put out there. But having said that, if you strategically put stuff out there, I predict in the future, you won't have to look for a job. The job will find you. If you just looked at LinkedIn now, you get bombardment of things that are very appropriate and on point, that is of interest, because they know your track record, they know what you posted, they know what you've done, they know who your friends are. Could you imagine if you would have a web of who Albert Einstein's friends were, that made Albert Einstein who he is, that network and that profile? They're getting that information from us now. They know the patterns, they know where things are going to fit before we do. So that can be good and bad. It can be, like anything, it can be used for good or evil. In terms of the advancement, look at the telephone. When we were kids, it was really cool when they developed that long, extra long telephone so you could go into the bathroom or another room and have a little bit of privacy. But someone was often listening on the other end. You had no privacy. When you watched Get Smart and he talked into his shoe, wow, that would be cool. I'd love to talk into my shoe. Star Trek had the communicators. It was sci-fi.
Yeah.
And when Motorola first made their first cell phones, it was the same style because people knew what they were getting. They wanted to be part of that tradition. And now it's normalized to a point. And perhaps we haven't developed the protocol or the courtesies or the common courtesies that one would have when you have a conversation with young kids. One's on their phone, someone else is looking, they're alone together often, but there's power in that too, because they can be looking up where the movie is they're going to go visit, but oftentimes they're not going to the movies now, they're watching it on their phone, which it hurts me. Or they can use the tools very effectively, but there's also a deficit. They don't communicate well. They don't look you in the eye. They don't self-advocate as well. And there's a host of research showing, particularly with women or young girls, that the comments that are put in social media can be very detrimental and cause depression and whatnot. A lot of schools are going to a point where they're locking up phones like going to a concert. My stance is that can be good, and it certainly makes your job as a teacher much better, because if you're collecting phones at the beginning of class and giving them out at the end, 5 minutes a day, that's 25 minutes a week. That adds up to a lot of lost learning. However, when they leave our school, they're going to have that impulse control, because when they go to a job, they have to resist that. When they're in the real world, they have to learn that self-control.
Yeah.
But there's protocols now. When you go to some restaurants, there's a box on the table, and there's a little note that says, we encourage you to put your cell phones in this box so you can have a conversation. When coaches have team dinners, they have stacks of cell phones when you come in, so the kids have to talk to one another. I find in my own course, the strongest thing, particularly for kids who don't go into the media field, that they come back and tell me has been most helpful, is they learn to look someone in the eye and talk to them, and they learn to communicate. One of the things that I sent to you earlier, I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, is something called Conquer Your Fears. And it's a video project that I have kids do where they read all the things they're going to learn about in our class that particular year. And they're literally reading it, not looking at the camera, very self-absorbed, and don't show this to anybody. And at the end of the year, they read it again, but they present looking in the camera. They might have the script underneath it, but they're learning techniques to communicate more effectively with it. And we intercut it. So you have a line of it back in September, you have a line in June, and you can clearly see the progress that a kid has. And to a person, when they come back, they say their ability to communicate has given them such an advantage, both in college and the workplace, because they feel that their peers don't have that. And they don't.
Yeah. I took Toastmasters International, chapters everywhere. So once every 2 weeks, you have a meeting, and you have an opportunity, there's all different roles, to get up and communicate, standing on your feet with no script. And sometimes it's impromptu, sometimes it's prepared. So and Toastmasters has been hugely successful for adults, because of the same problem, ability to communicate. But this book I read, getting back to that, it was all about what they call these people who you're referring to as content creators. That's the catchphrase out there. And so what you've been doing, to some degree, is you've been training content creators, whether it's this much, to their 3 best friends, or whether it's this much to 100 million people potentially.
Well, let's talk about a couple of those kids.
It's scalable, is the word.
Well, two that come quickly to mind are Matt Giglio and Mendon. For our advanced kids, we have a TV1 program that can be split into 2 classes or taken as a full year, and then a TV2, and then you work independent. So I had a kid come up and he wanted to do a podcast, and he wasn't the most disciplined student. I won't say which one, was it Matt or Min? And so I said, do a proof of concept. So this was just when COVID started to hit. And they made we made it a vodcast so we could also put it in video. And not only did they have a pretty good experience, that summer on their own, they continued to make them. And I was looking for one a week. They were putting out 2 or 3 a week. And I'm encouraged that they're moving away from just talking amongst themselves to inviting college players to talk and college coaches to talk, and kind of expanding and growing their brand, if you will. And it's exciting. And on a local level, we have a young lady called Michaela Costello. And she realized that kids weren't doing Twitter or X, as it's called now. I modeled what you could do with social media on Twitter and hoping that my kids would pick it up. Well, she grabbed the torch, but she made it to their generation. They're into Instagram or Snapchat, but more Instagram is more of a vehicle for promotion. And she pitched an idea to do an athletic Instagram where her and her fellow students would produce content. It started out with a team, but it's evolved into her doing it all herself. And it is amazing. High quality photos, high quality hype videos. It has a really wonderful following, and the quality is mind-blowing. And what I hate about teaching is I have these great students who get to a pinnacle and then they move on. So I'm gonna miss her next year. But the other thing is following their careers when they go, and she's amazing. She's like having another adult in the room. I'm not dealing with a kid, I'm dealing with a really powerful young lady.
They have now what they call collaboratives.
Okay.
Which is TikTok. They have collaboratives like in Los Angeles. They have them all over the world, where all these content creators get together, and they sort of like live in a house, and they're all very intense, and they're all intent on making money. I mean, that's what this is about. But the young lady you were describing, who was these people face the problem where they have to feed the monster. And they have to feed it every day, and maybe they get Monday afternoon off. So it's the intensity of the experience is huge.
It's fun when
it's a winnowing thing.
Yes,
so
it's fun when you start, but to have to maintain it is the sign of commitment and excellence. And to your point of these house collabs, a lot of it is, I have a following of so many people. You have a following of so many people. If I can introduce you to my following and you can introduce me to your following, we both grow. And on that point, there's a Canton grad. I did not teach him. I wish I could think of his name, and I can't. But he went to, I believe, Boston College. He was a great athlete, but he wanted to be in theater, but it wasn't cool to be in theater in high school. So he didn't do it, and he regretted it. So he started to take acting classes, and he wanted to be involved in the acting world. So what he did was he followed brands that he liked, and he commented them on. He made it a habit every day. I'm going to spend 5 minutes commenting on stuff and putting my own stuff out there. And suddenly people are looking, who are big names, and saying, who's this guy who keeps on coming up in my feed? And he was able to network and eventually get Nike commercials and other things that he got because of his networking skills. So the world's a much smaller place, and you can make your own luck. You just have to be willing to do the work. And as you said, in your example, consistently produce material.
But yeah, on that point, but the model now is, again, this is just one book I read, but this morning basically, but these guys create an audience, right? And then they create the product. Whereas conventional things is they create the product and then they find the audience. So these guys who are all, or ladies or whatever, building, through their videos and whatever, they're building this community of these, I don't know, community is not the right word, but followers or something who follow them closely. That's the objective, is to get them in. And then you find products to sell to them. Like Nordstrom was an example they gave. 60%, Nordstrom got onto this very early, and Nordstrom gradually ramped it up so that 60% of their products were created by these types of people who had such brand identification, sense of brand identification, that 62% of Nordstrom's I don't know if it's all their products or whatever, but Nordstrom was pointed out as being very prescient. They got it right away because it's a brutal business, those department stores. So they manage. I don't know whether the influencers are obviously that's one of the terms.
I'm going to use another term, manipulator. And we are constantly being manipulated to buy things that we don't want or don't need. Yeah. When Amazon first came into the realm, I used to have a stack of books because other people like me read them and they knew it and they were able to market to me directly. And then I started to realize, wait a minute, I'm not reading all these books, but I'm still buying them. Mm-hmm. The same is true for apparel or anything. That youth market is the most lucrative market. They don't have a mortgage. They don't have to make payments for college yet. They don't have to pay the electric bill. They have a part-time job, and that whole check can go to products. So they're a very target-rich audience. So as an educator, I see my need to inoculate them like a vaccine to these marketing pressures. And the term is, I'm losing it right now, and it's a mainstream term in education, but basically you're looking to show people how persuasive techniques are used against them. Media literacy, there we go.
Media literacy?
Yeah, a big proponent of it is Renee Hobbs. She's a great author on it. She's based out of URI, has a huge network of people, which I connected with during COVID. It was some line somewhere that said, hey, if you're a teacher and you want to connect with other teachers, and that's how I got into their network. But they have some very great curriculum material on deconstructing commercial messages. So you see how you're being manipulated, and we're using it for good. We're doing PSAs this week, and we're looking at, okay, what's the Aristotelian, like he had the Aristotelian triangle persuasion of ethos, logos, and pathos. So the kids don't know what the Latin, they don't know what this means. So we talk about head, heart, and hands.
Yeah.
What do you want people to think about this? Why is this important? So we look at a PSA from Dana-Farber, and they talk about 70% of childhood cancers have been cured because of donations that people gave. So that 70% is the ethos of it, or the head of it. We're curing cancer, won't you give? That's your call to action, or your hands. So we analyze those, how other ads use it, and we empower them to create PSA messages. And one of them was a Hawk Film Festival winner last year, a really fantastic one on gun safety, and that you should lock up your gun. And I was really proud of them because I won't let them use a weapon in an ad. And they very carefully were able to show the outcome of not locking up your weapon without showing a weapon. Point being is, by analyzing how other ads are done and by producing it yourself, you become more keenly alert to how other people are manipulating you. Well, and hopefully you're inoculated against it.
Well, again, referring back to this book, they talk about the algorithms that are developed by the advertisers. Advertisers are very fickle. And these algorithms can tell whether Bill Ames has looked at this, whatever, for 2 seconds, 1 second, or whatever, and we all know what happens then. So if you're one of these content creators, and your content, the algorithm pops it back to the Coca-Cola or whatever, that it's not, they're not sticking with you. They're brutal. I mean, you are gone. I mean, your career is almost over.
Here's another insight, a COVID insight. I can't think of his name, but Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank.
Oh yeah.
He said during COVID, because video became so important from Zoom meetings and whatnot, was that the most valuable person was the people creating product promotions for his wares, and that someone who can craft a good script and a good video that communicates an idea is invaluable. And they're more important than he can't pay them enough to do that in terms of a valued service, and was really stressing the importance of what we do and the storytelling, not just through words, but through the subtext of images that you're kind of pushing. You're saying the sophistication of the AI and stuff that kind of massages it, but I'm saying that we have to make people aware that that's happening, so you're not passive consumers and just riding down the river of to the direction that you might not want to go, and know what you're getting into. So hopefully we're doing that.
Well, the other thing they mentioned was subscription-based services. That is, if you can pull off a subscription-based service, you know, which is like, hello. You know,
well, look at Adobe versus Apple's Final Cut. Two different models. Adobe has a monthly subscription fee, so you're constantly paying for that editing program. You never pay it off. For Final Cut, you pay $300. You have it for the life of that machine. Now, granted, there's some updates, and they'll eventually change it down the road. But I could pay $300 for my Adobe subscription in a year or two, where my Apple ones was paid off 10 years ago, and I still have it. So there's some real like chip. You forget how many at your pocketbook. It chips away at it, and you forget you maybe even had some subscriptions, and it's sucking it out of your bank account or a nebulous charge on a credit card that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you're spending a fortune that you shouldn't have to spend if you make clear decisions on what works for you. So again, you're being manipulated, and you need to push back, or
you want to be
you'll be owned by
You want to be the manipulator, not the manipulated. If you're trying to make money.
Yeah, but again, it's are you doing it for good or evil? Now, making money is good. We need to make money, but we also need to be responsible. And I think there's a lot of irresponsibility in today's business market.
Well, that's as I was saying earlier. That's what shocked the YouTube world. 2018, 2019. I won't go into the examples, but
look at the music industry and Napster. You know, the kid down in Hull who made this program where you could share music, and it was so easy to make a copy that was perfect because it was digital. Versus when I was a kid, you got 2 cassette tapes and you made a copy of your favorite tunes for someone, but there was hiss on it. It wasn't a great reproduced piece. But with digital, you get the same recording as RCA was sending out. So we no longer have record stores. They're not needed. It's now streamed. And it's easy to trade. So when Napster first came out, they were going after kids as well as large companies who shared programs to push back. Then they got the idea, well, wait a minute, we need to find another business model, and you have various Apple Music, you have Spotify. They've found other ways of doing it, but the music industry really hasn't recovered to the same effect. And you have several groups. You have the composers, you have the artisans, you have the labels. And the labels never lose money. But the artists don't often get what they can. But with digital, you can be control of your destiny. You might not have a sold out concert like the Britney tour, but you could certainly get 100,000 followers if you have a passion, if you have an audience that you can cultivate, that you can control. So there's a guy who was a band guy. He is a musician. He traveled the country in a van with his friends and got married, settled down in New York, and had a kid. And suddenly, Popeye needed a new pair of shoes. He couldn't just, do a gig and pass the hat around and get $30 for the night. He had to get some real money. So he got a job coding. And he played in the band, the bars and stuff at night. But he wrote a song about what he knew, which was coding. And he had $100,000 99-cent sales. So he made $100,000 on that He might not have got it all, but he got a good chunk of it. And now he has a follower base that likes songs about what he writes. And the next one, he might only get 50,000, but he had 50,000 he didn't get. Now he has a music career that he controls, that isn't controlled on a corporate level, that we have to go to LA and
the
whatnot.
algorithms are always watching it. That's the problem. That's the challenge. Like in any business.
Here's another challenge. Amazon will watch and see what's selling, and will duplicate it and crush the little guy too. So I think regulation can be a really nasty word.
What you need to do is, if you're that guy, you have to make sure your wife has a good, solid job as a vice president of a bank.
That doesn't hurt. But I also
have to make
think
a strategic decision about your life.
But if you look at Europe, they're putting a lot more restrictions on social media companies. We're even looking at it now with, should we make TikTok, because of its concerns of data collection and how it might have geopolitical reasons to cut back. I think as people look under the hood and get kind of shocked at what they see, there's going to be more regulation, but you don't want so much regulation that you strangle. So
chasing your tail.
It's a teeter-totter.
Yeah, because if you look at TikTok, I mean, which I've sort of read the book and looked at, I mean, it's a lot of just dance routines, lip sync. And these people are making real money. I mean, that's not a trivial statement. People are making,
started as that, but it's much more.
It's more than that. But
now it
it's
has
a
grown.
huge base of it is these kids who are doing it, and a small percentage of them are on a journey to success, no doubt, doing it.
But it's also older people too that have found angles that they might use.
No
be
doubt.
it a gardening, or be it pet care, or be it whatever
that's
you care about.
That's to keep your eye on, to make the thing sound like it's really worth
well,
all the risks.
Like I don't know what you had for dinner last night, but was it fast food, or did you cook the meal? Did you?
I can't remember what I had.
But my point being is, if you have a good chef who cooks a beautiful meal, it's nutritious, it's healthy. If you're eating Big Macs every night, like the guy did in Super Size Me, it's not very healthy. So, like anything, it's a diet. You have to choose. You have to be a good consumer of media as well as food, because you are what you eat. Like all these things, though, the tide goes in, the tide goes out. If you look at television and what programming or music, what was popular in one era is not popular in this era. Things change, but storytelling stays the same. You need a story, and that's the bedrock. Be it in a dance routine, how do you do the dance? You have to convince them that these are the steps. That's a story. If it's the passion of a gardener, or a passion of someone who has a product they're trying to push on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or whatever it happens to be, it's the story that holds it together, and it's humanity communicating with people and developing that followership.
But you have, in a story, you have two things. You have plot and you have characters. So the key is, I mean, this is...
I'd add one more, conflict.
Right. Well, that's the plot.
Oh, fair enough.
How the characters are, but
Sure.
plot v characters. So, I have no great insights on the subject, but I took a course in storytelling once, and it is speaking to the power of storytelling is huge. I memorized this, or created this I basically stole it from a sermon that I read. A minister was a wonderful story, a very moving sort of motivational story. And I, tweaked it around. So I get up and tell a story. Sometimes at a dinner party or whatever, a gathering, I get myself called on it. God, you could just feel the people locking in after a while, if you use the right words. And if you're, you have to, it's like anything, to tell a good story, you have to have told it 20, 30 times, because then you get a sense of, what the audience will lock into, when they will get involved, and whatever, or if they don't, you change it.
Well, one of the things that, Ed, you impressed me with was the storytelling from your childhood. But I am not surprised, because the Irish are the epitome of fantastic storytellers. I mean, they're the ones who are doing all the storytelling. I mean, you can listen to an uneducated Irishman getting up and rattling off a story, and people are locked in. They are mesmerized.
And they've heard it before.
Maybe.
You go to these bars.
Yes, yes.
I've been to bars in Limerick or whatever.
Yes.
I mean, they like the stories because they probably knew who the story was about, and they want to hear it again.
I think the Irish have a good reputation of storytellers, but I think it's true in any society.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
And oftentimes in the corporate world, they talk about you have to tell the story of your company, and it has to be sticky, it has to be memorable, it has to resonate with people. And people want to know your background or your origins and your values. And storytelling is a way to imprint those on the next generation. And there's things that you look at TikTok or YouTube or whatever that's not what you want your kid doing. But there are things out there that do support your values.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that need air added to the fire so they grow brightly, and the ones that are distracting will eventually burn out.
We just go onto Netflix and look at the documentaries. These people who start maybe doing this sort of TikTok-y stuff, but work their way into it. They have to find a career, and they end up like your son after 20 years of sweating it out.
Yeah.
He's fine. He's met the big leagues.
But what's interesting about digital is that it's easy to do niches or focused areas. If you look at publishing, there used to be a boating magazine, Boating World or whatnot, but now there's Wooden Boat, there's this boat, that boat, the other boat. There's one for every strand that you're interested in. You don't have to have the big tent, you can have a lot of little tents.
Because there's a lot of advertisers for those little tents.
Well, sometimes they don't have those advertisers, but if you have a targeted group and they know what that demographic is, advertisers like that as well.
Right, because if you're doing a boat thing, and here are all these boat places that work on wooden boats, and you say, I'm doing something on wooden boats, build it. But if you're just a yachting magazine, they're gonna, the metrics or whatever they have not be as compelling. So that's where it sort of works.
But to the point of your view in social media, you can develop something very low cost. You have a cell phone in your pocket, you can write your script on it, you can shoot it, you can edit it, you can post it, all from anywhere you happen to be. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Before, you had to get a corporation like CBS to take your program to be able to distribute it. Now anybody can distribute it.
And you can distribute it across the entire planet.
Right.
And if it's good and you network and you collab and you work with others and you build your brand, people will find you.
So you build your audience. This gets back to the earlier point. You build the audience first by hook or by crook. And then you start doing the development of products because they're following you. You're an influencer. That's what influencing is. It's not like I go to Coke and Pepsi right away and say, I can pitch your product. You get 5 million people like Oprah, whatever. I'm just winging it here, but
you're looking at it from that lens of a business, and that's true. But I'm looking at it from the lens of passion and interest.
Yeah.
And that's what's really going to drive something to success. If it doesn't have a solid foundation, it's going to crumble.
Yeah. So
you have to have that passion and expertise that is worth watching. Speaking
of passion and expertise, Ed, before the show we were talking about Emerson College. Let's talk a little bit about Emerson and why it has created such a powerful force in the media business in terms of people and coming out of high schools and going in.
Well, I don't want to just lean on Emerson. Well, I think any good communication program or any good program has an alumni network. So I'm going to take two strands. You have on one end, Emerson, which is a private institution, focuses purely on communications, does it spectacularly well. But if you're going into the field and you're of limited means, you can get an Emerson education, you can get a loan, but then can you do the entry-level work when you get out in order to get that job, or do you have to take something to pay those big costs off later? So on one, if you can afford Emerson and it's a good fit for you, wonderful. And I like to talk about a fit. What size shoes do you take, Bill?
9.5.
What size shoe do you have?
9.
So you might be able to fit in Bill's shoe, but if he had 11, it'd be too big and yours would be too small. So finding a college is like finding a shoe. It has to fit you, not your parent, not your teacher, not your counselor, but you and your long-term needs. And certainly the style, they need to have some input because they're probably paying for part of it. But so back to my point, you have on one end Emerson, a very strong, high-powered school, but then you have a public university like Fitchburg State that also has an incredible alumni network, that also has a great tradition of getting folks to Hollywood and whatnot, a great position of getting people places. Maybe not as elegant as Emerson, but then you can take a look at NYU and they're a little bit more up on the food chain, or they tend to fight University of Southern Cal for the top film schools in the country.
Now they can be the top film schools, but how many jobs do they get?
Well,
See, now my son went to Ithaca and he was a film major, and what catapulted his career was the fact that optional was a semester in Hollywood, and the kids were placed according to their degree, what they were pursuing. And so if it was film, it was in studios. If it was corporate communication, it was in a corporation somewhere. And they worked as interns for 3 days, and they took classes for 2. And I remember it was the classrooms were in Brentwood, and we're all familiar with that name, right? So they were right in the midst of Hollywood and film and all the influences. And my son went the last semester of college so that he could, if somebody offered him a job, he could say, "Oh, I'm just going back to graduate. I'll be right back in a week." And that's what happened to him. So he was with Silver Pictures for 11 years. He learned the business, didn't get paid much, drove for Uber and Lyft, and often slept on a friend's couch. But, he made it after 22 years of struggle and never giving up. Why? Because he got that advantage in the early years, but also because he loved what he did. He loved storytelling. He loved creating stories. He loved producing. He loved, and I am sure that Eric would have worked for nothing. And he almost was working for nothing in the way they paid him. But he loved it. And so your idea about passion, if you don't have the passion, you're not going to go anywhere. You can have the skills, but if you don't have the passion, you're not going to stick with it, because Hollywood is filled with so many creative people, right? There's people, my son is wonderfully creative, but there were other people just as creative as Eric. And why did he succeed and not someone else? Because he stuck with it. And he had this strong passion. He loved what he did, and that drove him to keep at it. So you keep working at something you love, right? Everybody does. Whether you're a teacher, you love what you do, right? And so that's the element that keeps people going.
To your point, though, internships are as valuable, if not more valuable, than the college education itself.
Exactly. And when he went to school, Ithaca College, it's so funny, he got a football scholarship. He wasn't the typical Hollywood kid that was tall and thin and wore white socks, He was this big guy and a football player. But the tuition back then, even though it is a private school, tuition's higher than state schools. It still wasn't $75,000 a year the way it is today. So your point about making choices about where the good programs are on the cheap side, like a state school, that's a very important point for kids today. But in my son's day, his parents paid for the undergraduate. Now, if he was going to go to graduate school, he was on his own, but parents paid for that. Nowadays, when you have $75,000 a year, multiply that times 4, most parents, and they have more than one kid, they're not going to be able to pay that. So the student's going to get loaded down with this loan, and then, as you say, they can't devote their whole life, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they have to have that other job in order to pay off their loans.
But you don't need to go to Emerson or BU
Yes.
or NYU to get an Emerson or BU
Exactly.
education. So here's an example of that. I wish I knew his name, but in Canton, Massachusetts, there's a place called Central Booking. If you're you're doing Ghostbusters and you need to staff up in the Boston area, they help staff you up. You can pay a fee and register and start as a PA and then eventually break into a trade union and work your way up. You do not even need to go to film school to get in the film industry today. Mm-hmm. What you need is to swim in the pond where the fish are.
Right.
So this guy who started this didn't go to BU, but had an incredible reputation at BU. Before social media, before the ways that we can connect now by following someone on an Instagram account, there was the business card. And he took a business card and he put it up in the bulletin boards of all the film department at BU and said, I'm willing to work on your film. And he was a good sound man. He had a bunch of good skills. And he didn't go to BU, but on their student films, he'd do their sound, he'd do their lighting, he'd do their editing. And they developed a reputation of the go-to guy. If you want to get a good grade, you want to have this guy in doing it. And professors started, when they had their films, say, hey, I want that guy to do the lighting on my film. So he learned by doing, and he learned the lessons that were learned in those classrooms, he learned through osmosis. Mm-hmm. And now he knew everybody in the film industry in this area. And when they needed to staff up, he had a legitimate opening to start this job bank site. So if you're Paramount Pictures, you're coming to Boston, if you're Clint Eastwood, you want to do Mystic River, he's this go-to guy to get people to staff up. But he didn't go to BU.
Yeah, right. Now,
the production side.
Yeah.
I have a good story about that.
Okay.
This has to do with my cousin who lived in the vineyard. So back when they were filming Jaws, he was just a teenager on the beach. And they came around, they got all these, recruited him with others to say, hey, we got this movie called Jaws, we need a beach scene, you guys want to be in it? So they all said, of course, yeah. So it was a big laugh. So they all were there, and Spielberg or whoever did Jaws was there, and all the big stars were there, and no one, of course, had any idea how big this film was going to be. So if you look at the movie Jaws, there is a beach scene, a couple, and there's my cousin there, and he became good pals. The assistant director liked him, so they stayed in touch, and that's how he entered the film. On the production side of the film business, he became sort of a go-to guy, like your guy, in New York, and Woody Allen liked him. So whenever Woody Allen needed a restaurant to film in or talk to the police department, he had guys who do it for Woody Allen, all because he was at the beach that day when they were trolling for.
That was just plain dumb luck.
Dumb luck.
But you can make your own luck.
Good
and
point.
One of the ways you do it is if you're on an entry-level position. And by the way, the Massachusetts Production Coalition does a workshop. I think it's coming up in May. If you're interested in getting in the film industry, it's in a local studio in the area, and they'll do some training and give you some leads on how you can get into the film industry. It's amazing in Massachusetts now. It used to be just, when the good weather comes to the fall, great exteriors. Hollywood loved getting us for the exteriors, but now they're making full-fledged films in this area. Mm. You have the new, completely built-out New England studios up in Old Fort Devens that have Hollywood-level sound stages with sand-filled walls that a 747 can fly overhead and you wouldn't hear it underneath. And they're building other ones closer to the city because you have to pay an extra fee for your union people to go that far out. So they're trying to do it more closely. High output in Canton films regularly. There's a ton of studios in this area that are in more, they might not have the soundproofing of a Hollywood sound set, mm-hmm. but they're producing in old factory spaces. They'll make the interiors for films that you've seen and know. And look at the film they did, Knives Out. They did over here in the Ames estate.
That's right.
They built the interior in a warehouse in Norwood, Canton. that they did the interior scenes of, and they filmed the exteriors over in Eastern because it was such a luscious environment and such a luscious exterior. You could never build that on the cheap.
You know, to add to your point about you can learn the business without going to film school. One of my son's very good friends, he directed all the Liam Neeson action movies. His name is Jaume, first name, Ciro Collet. He's from Barcelona. And when I first met him, he was just about to break in and make it. And I remember going to his house, and it didn't have much furniture in it. I brought him a bottle of glögg. It was Christmas.
Being Swedish that you
Swedish
are.
glögg. And what a wonderful guy. He learned the business by being an apprentice. He was an apprentice in Barcelona to a director, and then, you know, maybe he assisted the camera guy. I don't know. He was on the set all the time, and that's what he told me. That's how he learned the business. And it took him 17 years before he became his own director, and he directed in 2009 the movie Orphan that my son produced. And that's when they became good friends. And that's the most fantastic movie. I think that's one of the best movies, besides The Book of Eli. I think that's one of the best movies that Silver Pictures did. And he just bought a mansion in Hollywood. I mean, the guy is, you know, he's Mr. Success. And he's still a wonderful person, very down to earth, and very grateful for the journey and the success he's had. But he did it by on-the-job training. It wasn't in a film school, it wasn't in a classroom, it was watching how it's done. And then, of course, he's creative, he has the talent, but he has the passion.
And doing it well.
And doing it well.
And right, have a nice personality and all that stuff, which you got to have, right? You gotta
Well, that brings
know
another
how to
point
roll
up,
with it.
is there's a lot of downtime in the film industry where you have to hurry up and wait. And the ability to be, quote, a good hang. Like, you're someone I can sit and have a conversation with, and you're not going to drive me crazy. That's an important skill, too, to have. Mm-hmm. And you were teeing up, I think, a question with our relationship with Maria Franco, who was an Emerson grad and a Canton grad.
Yeah.
And the whole thing of Emerson having what they call the Emerson network, where if you're an Emerson director, if you're a director on a set and have hiring capabilities, you should be hiring someone from Emerson. You should be reaching back and helping this small back bay school that has grown into this incredible powerhouse. And they have a campus in LA, as many powerful schools do, to your point of those interning experiences. But you can get those experiences without going there. And the point is, you need to go extra early to the set. If you're supposed to report at 7, report at 6:30, because a gaffer might not show up, and they're looking around. Hey, this guy's reliable. He's here every day, or this gal. I'm going to elevate them. Suddenly, your days are shorter because you're not going to be the first one on, first one off, and your salary has been doubled. But as you said earlier, if it's a passion and you do it for free anyway, that's going to get you through those lean years.
Yeah.
That and a wife who has a good job. Or
and
husband.
You know what? We're out of time.
With that profound observation
and we've talked about everything in the business, but what we have to remember is you are at the Canton High School media director, and you're giving your students all this wonderful information that you've shared today. But let's not forget who you are and where you are, and appreciate all that you've done.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to have Ed back again. Don't forget, viewers, Ed McDonough, Mr. Film
Canton High
extraordinaire, filmmaker extraordinaire. You are the teacher, but you have all the resources. And I would suggest that you might want to start a new business, a side business in resources. All the information, you gave us new information about these sound stages and so forth, right?
Right. Well, we have to shut it down here. We're over an hour, so. Well,
sadly, if you want to look at some of my own work, you can follow me on Digicator, like educated but digital, on X or formerly Twitter. And I put a lot of shorts together, and you can get a sense of my own work. And I try to model for my students. But it's been a pleasure to be here today. I can't thank you enough.
And we will post all that information for the viewers. so they can get in touch with everything that Ed has created. Okay, how's that?
Thank you very much, Ed.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.